I was a Marine stationed in 29 Palms 2nd Battalion 7th Marines. One day during a 4-day weekend, after a long field training, me and my buddies decided to go to Las Vegas. But we had to take a shortcut through Amboy to get by 40. We began driving down the deserted road when night fell when we saw a group of people standing in the middle of the road. They were all dressed in black robes and had their faces covered with masks. We tried to swerve around them, but they wouldn't move. We swerved to the shoulder of the road, but my Honda Civic got stuck and couldn't move because we went downhill, and climbing up through gravel in a front-wheel drive car proved impossible. I came to a complete stop. All of us were terrified by what's going on. My buddy Martin began to talk after initial shock of the swerving of the road. "What are they doing?" he asked. "I have no idea, but it looks like they are coming towards us," I said as I watched a group of people approaching the car. They came up to the car and started banging on the car windows and doors, trying to break in. We were terrified and didn't know what to do. We tried to drive away, but our car wouldn't move. The cult members started chanting and circling around us. "Jake," my other buddy, said, "What's up with these people? Who are they?" "I have no idea." Suddenly I remembered that I had a K-bar knife in my glove compartment. I immediately went down to get it out. Meanwhile, people began to shake the car. One of them appeared out of nowhere with a sledgehammer. Martin saw him walking towards us, and he yelled, "He's got a sledgehammer." I then put the car in reverse and hit the gas, running over one of them. I kept driving down until the desert floor was somewhat flat. People then began to run towards us, screaming something very loud that we couldn't hear. I turned the car towards the road and floored it. We finally got on the hardball road and I floored my car, going about 120 miles per hour. We were no longer going to Las Vegas. We went straight to nearest police station in Barstow, California. We told the officer everything. He calmly took our police report and stepped out. He came back with what looked like his supervisor, who then asked us why we were driving there so late. We told the police officer that we were just going to Las Vegas for a weekend, and we had no intentions of getting in trouble. He proceeded to tell us about how dangerous it is to drive through that road at night. He told us that they periodically discover abandoned vehicles on that road and they are never able to find the driver. He said that he will contact San Bernardino Sheriff's Department and pass the report to them so they can go check it out. But he warned us not to take that road at night ever again. We returned to 29 Palms early next morning, pulled my squad leader and explained him what happened. Despite all of the seriousness of situation, he laughed at all of us. He said that he does not believe us and that he thinks that we were driving drunk, made this whole thing up. When we all returned to work on Tuesday, our fellow Marines were making fun of us, calling us abductees and cold boys. One of the lance corporals was asking if we were abducted and experimented on by aliens. He was joking, of course, but Jake, Martin, and I felt horrible as nobody believed us. About 2 months later, a Marine from 29 Palms to go to Vegas at night. Her car was discovered abandoned on the side of the road. She was never found or heard from again. Everybody wrote it off as AWOL, but I think I know what happened to her. Only if people would listen to our story, maybe they would take these threats more seriously. As for me, I will never forget that night on that lonely desert road. This next story was sent to me by an MP stationed in Fort Riley, Kansas. My whole life I wanted to join the military. When I turned 18, I immediately went to see Army recruiter. My dad was in the Army, so I thought I should continue on a family tradition. I went to basic training in 8 at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. If you never heard of this place, good for you. People that are stationed there call it Fort Lost in the Woods, as it's surrounded by vast Missouri wilderness, and a lot of times basic trainees get lost in the forest while doing land navigation training. Let's just say I was happy to get out of there and go to my first duty station. I got assigned an MP battalion at Fort Riley, Kansas, There's nothing exciting about Fort Riley, Kansas. But I go where Army needs me. My job was simple: drive around and follow the checklist. It included things like checking ammo holding area gates, drive around barracks to make sure nobody is being drunk and belligerent. All was well at first. I liked the job and the people I worked with. I was even thinking about re-enlisting for another 4 years. But then something happened. One night I had to patrol an area near where everybody trains. I went and got my coffee at the shopette, did all my radio checks, and big on driving. I got to a place called Four Corners. That's where training areas started. I began driving into a training area to make sure there was no civilian traffic there, when I noticed a figure walking down the road. At first I thought it was a random soldier returning from a long run. But then I thought to myself, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, who would be running right now? PT starts at 6:30. I decided to check it out. I turned on my lights and begun driving up towards him. As I got closer to him, I realized that it was not a soldier. He was dressed in old fatigues, something out of Civil War. Only thing I could tell was that he had a blue jacket and a blue cap. He also had a rifle, from what I can tell. I immediately stopped my car. I jumped out and I yelled at, "Hey, what are you doing here?" He did not respond. He just kept walking. I was terrified, but for some reason I still wanted to go after him. He was about 15 feet from me. When he turned around and looked at me, my heart nearly dropped to the ground. I felt a cold sensation around down my entire body. When he looked at me, I saw that his eyes were completely white, that his face was so pale that it nearly reflected off my flashlight. I begun stepping back, shocked by what I'm seeing. He stood there for a second looking straight in my eyes, and then he turned and continued walking. As he was walking deeper in the dark, I saw his figure slowly dissipate into thin air. I ran back to my car and radio back to MP station, but I didn't quite know what to say. Instead, I just pretended that I was doing a radio check. I sped back to Fort Riley cantonment area and sat on the PX parking lot for about 2 hours thinking about what happened. I will never forget this night. I could never tell anybody about it. I didn't want to be called crazy, so I just kept quiet. About a year later, a buddy of mine also saw a strange figure. This time he was walking by Commanding General's house as my buddy was patrolling the housing area. When he shared his experience, everybody just begun laughing, everybody except an old E7 who was stationed in Fort Riley for 10 years. He approached me and my buddy and begun telling us that he saw him too. He said he looked it up and it was old soldier who committed suicide back in 19th century. Legend has it, as he returned from an expedition, he found out that his wife left him. He committed a suicide and he's been walking streets of Fort Riley ever since. This next story was sent to me by an airman stationed in Thule Air Force Base. When I joined the Air Force, I had an idyllic picture of me being stationed somewhere sunny and warm, maybe Florida or California. I could see myself taking long strolls on the beach after work. Maybe picking up surfing as a hobby, getting into scuba diving, but that's not what United States Air Force had in for me. Being security forces in the Air Force means you can get stationed practically anywhere in the world. I got very unlucky. My first duty station was Thule Air Force Base. For those of you don't know, Thule Air Force Base is located in Greenland. It is the most northern U.S. military installation in the world, most of the year eventually frozen. There's absolutely nothing to do other than staring into the sky or enjoying a beautiful landscape of Greenland. Food was horrible, job was boring. I spend most of my days either guarding the gate or driving a road between the base and location of the radar. One night my partner and I were tasked with patrolling a lonely stretch of a road between Tulare Air Force Base and the radar. Gigantic radar was always manned 24/7 and always had bus go between there and the barracks for everybody lift. Shuttle would go there and back twice a day, once in the morning to pick up night shift guys and drop off day shift guys, same thing at night, pick up day shift guys and drop off the night shift guys. We were driving an Arctic version of F-350, the thing was diesel and super loud. We departed Security Forces Station at midnight, driving slowly along the road. Darkness of the night was a bit eerie, but lights are still. Air Force Base gave us a warm feeling that there's a civilization nearby in case something happens. But further we got away from the base, darker it got, finally driving in pitch black darkness. My buddy had to go to the bathroom. I stopped the truck and let him out. He left his weapon, an M4 carbine, sitting in the vehicle. I was just listening to the radio, trying to stay awake. Then suddenly I noticed the lights in the distance. At first I thought the shuttle was making an unscheduled run, but after looking at the lights, I realized that they were not bus headlights, they were something else moving erratically up and down. When finally I saw the lights take off up to the sky, I jumped. It was trying to get my buddy's attention. He also saw it. We'd both begun to freak out. My buddy grabbed his weapon, quickly put on his helmet, and pulled out his night vision goggles. He was trying to look through his night vision goggles to see what it was when the lights landed on the ground again. "Dude, what the hell are those things?" he said. "Look at how they move. They are like spheres or something." As he was talking, spheres were getting closer and closer, until they were right over us. We both were standing right next to the truck looking up when bright light shined in our faces. I don't remember what happened next. All I remember is waking up at the clinic, with a nurse standing over me. I've never seen before. We're standing behind her. Both had 511 clothes on. "Oh, thank God you're awake," she said. There were two people that have never seen before were standing behind her. Both had 511 clothes on and white earpieces in their ears. "Hey, we need to talk to you about what happened last night," they said. "Okay, sure," I said. I proceeded to explain what me and my buddy had seen. Both of the men, at no point of me talking, had changed expression on their faces. It's like they heard it before. One of them lent me a piece of paper stating that this is a non-disclosure agreement that I have to sign regarding this accident. Yes, they called it an accident. What was afraid to ask any questions about what happened, as both of the men gave me very uneasy feeling. I don't know what that was. It was either some government experiment or aliens. Whatever it was, I will never forget what happened that night on that cold, dark road in Greenland. If you enjoying the content of this channel, please hit subscribe and like buttons. My channel is new and any help would be appreciated. It doesn't cost anything to subscribe, but it will cost you missing some awesome content as we immerse ourselves into dark side of military service. Thank you. The U.S. Military Academy's buildings are covered with textured granite, turrets and perched gargoyles that gaze over cadets as they go about their day. Inside the large wooden doors, they walk through dimly lit hallways with triangular stone arches and wrought iron windows. Cadets over the years said they had a shared feeling as if they were being observed by an unseen presence, just to find no one there, while others have reported encountering apparitions in the middle of the night. This was frequently documented during the 1970s when a ghost visited the barracks. In 1972, West Point experienced an explosion of national inquiry and publicity because of a well-documented apparition that attracted famous demonologists, ghost hunters, and psychic mediums of the last century to investigate, but that is just one of West Point's ghostly tales. The stories below were sourced from more than 40 years of correspondence, articles and book excerpts collected by USMA historians. Lieutenant Colonel Timothy R. O'Neill gave a thorough perspective in his book, Shades of Grey. The following story was inspired by details from his research. Room 4714 in the Pusher. In October 1972 at 2 a.m. in Room 4714 of the North Barracks, 47th Division, two male cadets were sound asleep when a ghost soldier manifested in front of the younger cadet and the closet against a wall. The soldier stared with menacing eyes made of light that stirred the cadet to consciousness. Upon waking, the cadet screamed, and the soldier immediately vanished. The cadet's roommate did not see anything but said there was an otherworldly coldness in the room. The ghost was described as a middle-aged soldier donning an antique uniform from the 1830s, a musket, shako hat, handlebar mustache. The ghost earned his nickname the Pusher because his ice-cold presence forced other victims to lay immobile until the pressure of his hazy, glowing physique disappeared. According to the New York Times, the Pusher appeared a second time in an area known as the Bureau. One cadet they interviewed shared that the ghost walked out amidst a group of cadets, which caused them to scream, clutch each other, and say the rosary. Reports of seeing him were sporadic over the following years, but the pusher has not revisited where he first appeared. Room 4714 is no longer occupied by cadets. The room was converted into a study area and seemingly exorcised due to no other paranormal accounts being documented since 1972. The building has since been renamed Scott Barracks. Quarters 100 Molly and Greer. Over 217 years have passed since West Point opened its doors as an Army institution of higher learning, but the land hosts a complex history that comes with an abundance of stories. One can imagine there are plenty of other haunted areas on post besides the barracks. The superintendent's house is known as Quarters 100. For paranormal believers, it serves as a supernatural hotel given the variety of spirit personalities that come and go. Based on several reports, there are 2 permanent ghost residents to this day. Former Superintendent Lieutenant General William A. Knowlton invited married clairvoyants Eric and Lorraine Warren to perform a psychic investigation and seance at the house in 1972. The wife revealed her psychic impressions of those living in another dimension as she toured the rooms of Quarters 100. The superintendent noted detailed accounts of Warren's psychic impressions that she picked up during her investigation. They included descriptions of the spirits and energy present in each room. He wrote them down in a memorandum to the librarian requesting them to search West Point archives and find evidence that supported her claims. Warren described a woman who could be the ghost named Molly, an Irish cook who served Sylvanus Thayer. She is known to rumple bed linens and knock wine bottles to the floor in the kitchen. She is not old, very domineering, athletically inclined, and really not quite a lady. I get a feeling of no man. If she had a husband, he was dominated while at home, Warren said. Others who've worked at Quarters 100 have said that although mischievous, Molly does not mean any harm and is more playful than hurtful in nature. Another ghost that struck Warren with a strong psychic impression was an African American man named Greer. She shared that Greer is the one responsible for moving objects throughout the home. One example was written in Knowlton's memorandum. When the former superintendent of the Coast Guard Academy and his wife stayed at the house as guests, and they woke up early in the morning and found a wallet that belonged to another occupant in the home carefully placed between them in bed. Warren described Greer as tall and slender in a gray uniform, that he was an orderly to a superintendent, and communicated that he carries a deep burden of guilt and sadness from committing murder. In the librarian's response to the superintendent's request for verifiable information, archivists were able to find documented evidence of several African American men who came through West Point with Greer's name. One of the descriptions that potentially best fits that of the ghost Warner encountered was Lawrence Greer, a Buffalo soldier who turned out to be a criminal. General prisoner Lawrence Greer was definitely black, formerly a private in Troop C, 9th Cavalry. He escaped from confinement at Fort Leavenworth in June of 1931 and was apprehended the following April near Albany, New York. He was brought to West Point and court-martialed for his escape and subsequent desertion, Chief of USMA Archives Stanley Tezewski said. Found guilty, he was sentenced to 2.5 years of hard labor. However, the sentence was disapproved by command of Major General Connor because the prisoner was judged insane at the time of his trial. We have no record of what happened to Private Greer after these events. The librarian seemed motivated, but he said most of Warren's descriptions would require an extensive search of reminiscences from past superintendents which are not part of the archive's holdings. Today, West Point archivists can provide memories from past graduates and professors when they lived at another haunted house. Quarters 107B and the Lady. It was reported in email correspondence between several former cadets and the Association of Graduates that a ghostly occupant named the Lady resides at Quarters 107B on Professor's Row, a home overlooking the Hudson River. A professor once lived there with his young wife, but their story does not end happily ever after. The couple was struck with tragedy when she became fatally ill in the 1920s. To help ease her sickness and keep the house tidy, her mother came to live with them. The story goes that the professor and mother shared an attraction that grew into love, which devastated the wife. Perhaps her untimely death arrived even faster due to a broken heart. They say hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. She made her husband pledge not to remarry her mother, but once she took her last breath, he took vows shortly after with the mother anyway. The ghost was left by a man she was in love with for her own mother, and their affair began in the same home she was bedridden in. Some mediums say her intense emotional distress began while she was alive, but keeps her soul gripped to this world from a lack of finding peace. This is what has prompted chaotic paranormal activity over the years. It was reported that items were thrown and turned upside down. A clock that was frozen for years abruptly chimed to life, and a former tenant said they heard horrendous sounds in the night, like someone riding a big wheel across the wooden floor overhead. The haunting was so frequent the post engineer had to seal the ghost's bedroom off at one point because she scared people out of it, but the room was eventually reopened in the 1950s. Although these disturbing actions were not very ladylike, the ghost received her name from the 8-year-old daughter of a class of 1960 graduate. The family lived there between 1971-75, and the little girl and her younger sister occupied the haunted room during that time. The girl woke her parents up in the middle of the night on multiple occasions. They heard their child having a conversation, but after getting out of bed to check on her, they discovered she was not speaking with anyone they could see. When the parents asked her who she was talking to, she called her the lady. Share your paranormal experience with us. Aside from West Point's most famous spirits, there were reports of other paranormal activity throughout the installation. An extra head in a cadets group photo peered in from a MacArthur barracks window. Frightened pets barked at nothing in officers' quarters. A cleaner on the night crew quit his job after being thrown by a malevolent spirit in Building 606. Observation Post Rock, or Op Rock, was a small hill that served as a watchout for enemy soldiers. Teams would be stationed there to keep 24-hour surveillance and report any suspicious activity or advancement of enemy soldiers back to their base using radios. There was currently a team of British soldiers there keeping watch, and customarily, when a new team arrives to an outpost, the team departing will give them a lay of the land. But as the 8 Marines pulled up the dusty back road through the desert, they saw the British soldiers were eager to leave. The Marines reported that the British team leaving the post looked disheveled and anxious, as if they had experienced an attack. There was no formal greeting, no breakdown of the area. Nothing. The only word of advice given to the new team that arrived was, if you pick something up, put it back. It was said with the same gravitas a sergeant would use giving a command in battle, yet, this warning seemed to be about the amenities at the post. What they could possibly pick up, they didn't know. As they searched the post that first day, they realized there wasn't much there. Op Rock was much smaller than other observation posts. It was mostly few tents, some big sandbags to hide behind, and a series of trenches. But this was home for the next 2 months, so they were going to have to get used to it. Observation posts are typically targets for enemy fire, so it's important that whoever is stationed there has the ability to hide and protect themselves. The trenches were there to provide some of that protection, but the Marines quickly realized they were just not deep enough. When standing normally, their heads would peer over the top of the trench, visible to whoever was firing. If they were going to make it work, the trenches would have to be deeper. So they got to work digging. This was June, and the Afghan sun can be brutal that time of year. So maybe at first they thought they were suffering from heat stroke when they dug the shovel in and heard a crack. Through the soft dirt they could tell they had hit something solid and fragile. One of the lance corporals reached down to grab whatever they had hit. It felt smooth and had rounded edges. It was cool to the touch compared to the blistering heat around them. But when he pulled it out of the ground, the Marines all looked on in horror. It was a human femur. Perfectly intact. The men decided they had to keep digging to see what else was buried underneath their new home, and to their terror, they found multiple full skeletons, as well as Russian artifacts like stakes for tents. The New York Times reported that these skeletons were not just from the Russian soldiers that were there in the 80s. No, some were potentially centuries old. What the soldiers didn't know was that Op Rock had a history. A history that even locals in the area got nervous talking about. According to locals, the outpost used to be a burial site before the 1740s, after which it became a fort. Legend has it that 40 communist police officers were executed on the rock in 1980. The area was considered holy by locals, after a Soviet bomb hit the area but did not explode. They would share stories of enemy tanks being swallowed whole by the earth. Whatever was going on there was unkind to invaders. Maybe this is what the British soldiers meant by, if you pick something up, put it back. But it was too late. But the Marines weren't thinking of that, they were thinking of their safety, and they needed the trench to be deeper. So they continued digging. And whatever they disturbed made itself known immediately. The first night, one of the men, Corporal Lena, was preparing for the overnight watch. Each night, one of them would stay awake to monitor the area while the others slept. While he was the lone man awake, he heard the radios started glitching. There was a crackle, and then something that Lena described as a whisper. Not in any recognizable language, but at times, it almost sounded Russian. The radios were the only lifeline that the Marines had to base. It was what they would use to let base know if anything was headed towards them, but it also was the only way they had to tell base if they were being ambushed, so it was crucial that the radios were in perfect working condition. So Lena takes out the batteries and reboots the radios, but they're still making the weird noises. He ended up contacting base to ask if they were sending out or receiving any signals, but they confirmed that they weren't. That whole night, the crackles and the whispers continued. But that was nothing compared to 2 weeks later, when another Marine, Lance Corporal Hoyt, was on watch. When you're on watch, the safety of the group is your responsibility. So here it was just Corporal Hoyt, 7 sleeping Marines behind him, and the vast open emptiness of the Afghanistan desert. All of a sudden, Hoyt feels eyes on him, as if someone is watching his every move. He doesn't want to tip off an enemy soldiers, so he slowly brings up his gun to his face to see if he could get anything on his thermals. The report says that at this point the other Marines were awoken by a blood-curdling scream. But it wasn't Hoyt's. They all jump up, expecting an ambush, but all they find is a shaken Hoyt and a barking ugly Betty. He had seen something out in the desert. The figure of a man running behind a bush about 200 meters away. The scream had come from out in the distance in the man's direction. So Corporal Lena raised his thermal lens, but there was nothing out there. No matter where they looked, it was all the same temperature, meaning no life. Once they determined the man was no longer out there and there was no threat posed, they decided they'd hunt for tracks the next day to see where the man came from and where he went. But the next day, there was no trace that anyone had ever been there. The men needed to make sure that the perimeter was secure, so they set off to find bullet casings, boot prints, anything that indicated the man Hoyt saw had been there. But there was no indication. The Marines were shaken by this, but it seems like they still didn't think there was anything paranormal going on. They're out there hunting for a threat hidden in the mountains, so every strange thing that happens is being processed through the lens of someone out there wants to kill me. Ghosts were the last thing on their mind. One of the youngest Marines there, Lance Corporal Zolnik, started feeling differently one night when he was on watch out, however. Zolnik remembers how warm it was that night. It's the desert in the summer, and while it's cooler than the daytime, in all of your gear the nights are still pretty warm. That's why it was so strange when all of a sudden, a pocket of cold air hit him. It wasn't just a body chill, he started shivering from how cold the air around him became. Zolnik says he didn't think much of the change in temperature. The other men had also been complaining of that since they'd been there. But then, quietly behind him, he hears whispering. And his descriptions of the whispers sound similar to Lena's description of what came over the radios. Soft at first, not even sounding like language. But every couple of words he could make out something that sounded faintly Russian. And worse than the paranormal, Zolnik feared that he was losing his mind. It's no surprise that combat is extremely stressful, and that stress can play cruel tricks on your mind. Zolnik worried that the effects of war had caught up with him. But before he could think too much about it, he hears footsteps above him, like someone is running around on the wooden slabs of the shack that there. He runs up to see what's happening. He needs to make sure it's not the Taliban. But when he gets up to where he heard the sounds coming from, there's no one there. So he goes back down. And maybe in an attempt to prove to himself that he wasn't losing his mind, he raises his thermal lens to his face to see if he could see anyone out in the vast openness. And he does. There's a man with a heat signature, standing in front of his thermal lens. The man has his fists balled and up by his face. Zolnik is freaking out, but before he shoots he needs to make sure that it's not one of his own men, so he brings down his thermal lens. But the man is gone, there's no one out there when he looks out. Zolnik was so disturbed by this event that he requested to transfer. Combat fatigue is real and can have disastrous consequences, and he figured his mind was slipping away from the stress. And that would be believable if he were the only one having these experiences, but he wasn't. And they didn't stop after he left. They only got worse. Corporal Lena was out on patrol one night when Ugly Betty started barking. Really losing her mind at something in the distance. So Lena brings up his binoculars and he could faintly see the outline of something that looked like a person in the distance. Now, already they all thought that there was someone out in the bush that they couldn't see, so Lena is on high alert. He pulls his binoculars down to get a better look, but the figure is gone, he can't see it anymore. That was strange, he thought. But Betty is still Cujo barking out into the empty desert, so he brings his binoculars back up. And the figure is now 100 meters closer, staring directly at him. He's terrified, so he rips his binoculars away, and the figure is gone. He's trying to figure out what he saw when he feels the double tap on his back. That's how the man in charge, Sergeant Green, would get their attention. Lena turns around to tell him that there's someone out there, but no one is behind him. And when he looks back out into the vast darkness, Terry's nothing there. Not even when he uses his binoculars again. After that night, the men slowly started talking to each other. It started with Lena, but then every man on the team confessed that they too had experienced something unexplainable and incredibly strange. But at that point it was almost day 60, they had one more night before they were set to leave. So that night, they're all excited that they can finally get out tomorrow. Whatever happened that night wouldn't matter because they were driving out first thing in the morning. And now they were all expecting the usual, maybe some weird radio static and some whispering, but they felt prepared. But then the radios go out. Not just glitching, dead. And both of them. So they were not able to communicate with their base at all. And then, enemy fire. From everywhere. Corporal Lena said that it sounded like someone was standing in the trenches with them, firing directly next to their heads. It was that close. No one could tell exactly where it was coming from, so they were firing everywhere, at everything, just trying to cover themselves and make it stop. Worst of all, they hear the unsettling whistle of a rocket-propelled grenade, designed by the Soviets. Not only are they getting fired at from every angle, but by an artillery they were not equipped for. But then, as quickly as it started, it stopped. All of the gunfire ceased, and no one in the trenches had been hit. Not only that, but there were no stray bullets, or any evidence that they were just being shot at. The following morning, they said it took all of 5 minutes for them to pack up all of their stuff and head out. Though their time at the post was officially over, what transpired there haunted the soldiers for the rest of their lives, and a few of the men have suggested that they feel like the post cursed them. Of the 8 men stationed there in 2009, 3 of the Marines would go on to die in battle, and Sergeant Green would become disfigured in an I'd attack. They fear that whatever was hunting them at the post may have followed them. Were they being tormented by a lone enemy soldier, or was it something else? Maybe the echoes of the past can still be heard in the region, and maybe the ghosts of soldiers from before are cursed to be permanently stationed where they met their fates. Maybe the land really is sentient like the locals suggest. These stories are chilling, but they're at least of our world. Various soldiers that have never met have recounted seeing the same entity in another part of the country, but this time it's not of our world. It's something much darker. More after the break. Years ago, in the heat of the war, there was a soldier who got a call that there was an ambush at the nearby airfield, and they needed everyone out there, stat. So he jumps in the closest car and heads out to the airfield with a couple other guys. When he gets there, he can see one lone man, crawling over the fence from the outside, trying to get into the airfield. So, what do? They all lift up their weapons and fire a single shot each. One bullet makes contact and the man drops. But as he's falling, it looks like Terry's black smoke pouring out of him. One of the guys makes a comment that it looks like it was a suicide bomber. They must have hit his vest and now smoke was pouring out. But as they kept watching him, more and more smoke poured out, until the black fog surrounded the man and made a human-like creature. Through the creature's darkness they could see glowing red eyes, glaring back at them. And then it started to laugh. They raised their weapons in fear, but the man said that the creature took a few steps forward and then dissipated. He was never able to make sense of what happened. He claimed they only spoke about it one time after that and then agreed to never speak about it again. This red-eyed creature shows up in multiple accounts from soldiers who served in different units. Each account is in a different context, but each time, the creature is described similarly. Like this story that was posted to Reddit 8 years ago. I was an infantryman during the invasion of Iraq in 2003, my unit was 122 in 4th ID. We pushed into Baghdad, and then took an airfield just north of the city. Then we headed north, up Highway 1. The majority of my unit stayed in Tikrit, Saddam's hometown. My company kept going north with 366 armor to a huge enemy ammo depot nearby G. We began operating around that area, and then shortly moved to nearby K2 airfield, and set up a more permanent forward operating base, or FOB. K2 airfield had a residential area that had been abandoned, near the end of the runway. It was on post housing for the Iraqi Air Force personnel that ran the base, but they had left way before our arrival. What was strange is that it seems it was abandoned before the invasion. There were pots and pans in the sink, there were clothes on the line, but there was lots of dust all over everything. Looters had been there, they were everywhere during that time, but they left mostly everything. My unit moved into the end of the airfield, into some bombed-out warehouses, and an MP company moved into the biggest houses in the abandoned housing area. We started to call the ghost town. The MPs that took up residence in the ghost town moved out after about a week. I asked one of the very tired-looking MPs why, as everyone was jealous that they lived in actual homes, albeit abandoned, shabby ones, instead of bombed-out warehouses, and I was curious about their speedy move. He said that they couldn't sleep, doors would open and shut all night, they heard footsteps running up and down the halls at night, and then finally they began to see children's faces looking in at them through the windows. The U.S. Army does not function with consideration to ghosts, and for them to get their chain of command to move their whole company out of the ghost town, there must have been some tangible events that affected their operational readiness. Their move meant that now our residence was the new perimeter of our FOB closest to the ghost town, so we took up nighttime security every night around our warehouse. We would each do an hour shift, and we had a watch going all night long. We had thermal sights and night vision, and we would sit out there scanning the desert for enemy activity. During our watch, we could all hear children laughing and playing, all night long. It sounded like a playground was active in the ghost town, but we verified with our thermal sights, it was empty. We often had pebbles thrown at us. We would sit out there, alone or in pairs, and listen to the laughter while getting hit by rocks. Nothing big, but they would bounce off your face, your helmet, your vest. The whole time scanning with thermals and night vision, nobody there, listening to the laughter. This happened night after night, we all talked about it with each other, nobody was happy about it, but we sucked it up. In 2004, we had a change of command, and upon hearing about the situation, our new commanding officer said there is no supernatural activity in this ghost town, only enemy activity. This was partially true because we had been attacked with sniper fire and RPGs from that direction multiple times. His decision was to set up a nightly patrol and set up ambushes in the ghost town every night. We were already busy, looking for WMDs during the day, raiding Saddam's baths during the night. We had been doing 18 to 36-hour patrols, QRF, convoy security, more patrols, show of force, ambushes, the works. And now this. So it began. My squad had done the new patrol a few times, and it always seemed extra dark when walking through the ghost town. There was an old British fort left over from their colonial days, with firing ports and towers. Streets with sidewalks, and pretty decent houses, all empty. While on patrol, we could still hear the kids playing, but it seemed just as faint as when we were on perimeter guard. We would get on a roof, lay there on ambush and just listen. To the wind, the kids, and that's it. One night, we were patrolling through the ghost town, in a modified wedge formation. One of our soldiers said, "What the hell?" Then screamed, "What the hell is that?" He pointed his weapon to the middle of our formation, then dropped his weapon, and ran. He ran alone in the dark, unarmed in the middle of a combat zone, away from everyone. Those of us that looked where he pointed, saw it. Those of us that looked at the fleeing soldier, heard it. Walking with us was a solid shadow, with roughly the shape of a person. Tall, with really long arms, skinny legs, and a very narrow torso. It turned its head back and forth as if surprised to be discovered. It bent down, and then it leapt. It landed in a crouch on top of a nearby chain-link fence still facing us, and moving its head to look at us. Its eyes then quickly flashed red, and then it jumped backwards off the fence and disappeared into the night. We caught up with the soldier. Our squad leader was super pissed. He got roughed up a bit, as he had absolutely lost it, screaming and crying. This soldier was solid. I've personally seen him shoot an enemy, at close range. We'd all been through a lot, and we were both confident and competent. What we saw that night was not the scariest thing we had been through that deployment. Engaging the enemy on the regular was. But the enemy made sense. This creature did an apostrophe T. It was by far the most disturbing thing I've ever witnessed, as it seemed to have a purpose keeping pace with us. From that point on, whenever it was our turn to patrol Ghost Town, our squad leader would lead us to just the edge and we would wait, not going in. I'm sure we all still appreciate that to this day. Whatever that was doesn't feel like a ghost, and it certainly doesn't feel human. Some locals suggested that these were jinns, creatures from the Quran that were forged in the smokeless flame of a fire, while angels were forged in the light. American soldiers may compare them to demons, but they're more nuanced than that. Some will say these are just tall tales from the battlefield, legends forged by over-exaggeration and combat exhaustion. But when multiple people are coming home and complaining about a red-eyed creature, it makes you wonder. What is it doing out there, and is it specifically targeting invading forces? I guess we will never know. Till the next time. I was a soldier with 10th Mountain Division when this happened. To give you some background, I am from New York City and joined the Army to see the world. But I ended up not seeing anything except HESCO barriers and T-walls. I joined the Army in 2016. After basic training at Fort Benning, I was given a choice of Fort Drum or Fort Polk. Well, hell, I thought, Fort Drum is in New York, so that's no-brainer. Only if they would have told me it's more in Canada than it is in New York. Anyways, I ended up in 10th Mountain Division, 2nd Brigade or Commandos, at least that's we called ourselves. I spent some time doing usual garrison stuff, sweeping sidewalks, mowing grass and cleaning my weapon over and over again after a range. We got pure dep ord or deployment order about 8 months before we had to head out to Syria. We spent some time training in the woods of upstate New York, and then we departed to Fort Polk, Louisiana, Joint Readiness Training Center, where we spent 30 days battling simulated enemy, just another U.S. unit that pretends to be an enemy. We called them Geronimos or G-Men. After we got back from Louisiana, we started deployment preparations, packing up our gear and shipping it all out in the containers to Kuwait, getting our vehicles loaded onto railhead to get them down to the port. I went home to NYC a few times before I deployed. I was little jealous of people that get to stay back. They get to tear up lower Manhattan, and I get to stay at Fort Drum, surrounded by mountains of snow. But it's okay, that was my choice to volunteer and join the Army. We boarded a plane at Army Airfield on Fort Drum, and flew to Ramstein, Germany, where we spent another day waiting for plane to get fixed. We then flew to Kuwait City Airport. We were picked up by buses and taken to a place called Camp Buring. We spent about a week at Camp Buring before we departed for Syria. We were going to a very remote place. I'm not going to reveal the name of a fob that I was on, but let's just say it was awfully close to Syrians and Russians. We could practically see them across the river. Occasionally we would get rocket fire from Iranian militias. The task force would respond with some airstrikes, calming things down for a while. That kind of went on for about 2 months. I remember sitting in on a briefing that went over our area of operations. The intelligence officer that was briefing us seems very knowledgeable and involved in the subject. He kept talking about deteriorating situation in Badia Desert. For those of you don't know, but Badia Desert, as we call it, White Desert, he's a large chunk of Syria. It stretches from city of Palmyra to Euphrates River. It's vast and largely uninhabited. For decades it's been ruled by tribes. Most of those tribes were not friendly to any foreigners, even if they were Syrians. Naturally, it became a great habitat for ISIS. They were hiding among tribesmen, occasionally harassing Russians and Syrians traveling through the area, setting up ambushes and carrying out raids on Syrian outposts in the area. It was a fucking Wild West. Nobody really controlled the area. Russian and Syrian convoys would just quickly zoom through the desert to make it to the Deir Easy Zor, or as we call the Daz. All of that was really interesting, but we weren't even allowed to leave the FOB. Only special operations units were able to roam around the company, and Kurds and fighting bad guys, we were not there for that. Only thing we had left to do is guard the FOB, dodge incoming rockets, and watch horrible movies. We're quickly getting bored, and finally we were given an opportunity to go out. Guess where we're going out to? That's right, White Desert. We can never have nice things. The mission was rather simple. We were in support of a raid into White Desert, killer capture some bad guy that lived in a very remote village. The village was so remote and unexplored, even Google Earth images of the area made it look like foot of a modern human being did not step there since Roman times. There wasn't even a road to that village, but we did see a bunch of tracks from Toyota Hiluxes used by ISIS. The mission preparations were very long. We kept rehearsing and rehearsing until we got our actions and objective just perfect. It seemed very redundant. Our command wanted to look good in the front of their boss as well as special operations guys we were supporting. Pretty standard practice in the United States Army, dog and pony show all the way. The mission was pretty simple. Get him a Chinook flyover to that village, set up some blocking positions, and let soft guys do their job. That's as simple as it gets. Finally, before about a day or two away from the D-Day, this was a big deal for all of us, because most of us did not have a real combat experience. This was going to be a Super Bowl for most of us. The start time for the mission was midnight. We were to grab our gear, 72 hours worth of stuff in our assault packs, and wait at the airfield for Chinooks to arrive from Iraq. They were then to pick us up, by around the Daz to avoid Syrian air defense, in and execute the raid. Sounds simple, doesn't it? Well, things are never simple, not during the war at least. Right away, only 2 Chinook helicopters flew in. I had to cut our force and a half because other 2 Chinooks broke down. That's not a good start. I've been more problems started. Should be precise, the pilot couldn't find objective. You just kept flying around alerting all the bad guys in the area that were coming. Finally we're able to find the target village and get out of that god-forsaken and helicopter. My squad dismounted the Chinook and quickly rushed to our identified blocking position. I was a squad designated marksman. I took up my position with my sniper rifle that I borrowed from sniper section for this mission, and set up my observation post for OP. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. We knew that bad guys would not take us this early because they didn't have night vision, and we did. Besides, there was an armed MQ-9 circle around our heads waiting to smoke some bad guys if needed. We kept waiting for the soft guys to land and do their thing, but they never flew up. Things started to become more and more fucked up. We just sat there waiting for them until sunrise, but they never showed up. At about 6 o'clock in the morning, to pick up trucks with heavy machine guns on them begun to approach us. I started to engage them. They were too far away. They knew what they were doing. they stop just short of maximum effective range of a sniper rifle and begin spraying us with their heavy machine gun. The MQ-9 spotted them a while ago, but for some reason the pilot was not engaging. Later it turned out, they were waiting for us to give them clearance to fire, after we positively identified the target. What a load of bullshit that was. Anyway, luckily we had some javelins with us, just 3 rounds, but it was enough. We shot one, missed the technical, second one landed just on target, scaring the other one away. At this point we're all waiting to get extracted, but since there was presence hostiles in the area, the brigade commander would not approve. She looks to fly over there and possibly get blown up out of the sky. That was somewhat understandable, but what the fuck did they expect us to do? We spent all day sitting there, until the nightfall. We were rotating through security throughout night. My shift fell on 3 o'clock in the morning. I woke up, put my helmet on, grabbed my rifle and went to my observation post. It was really dark, almost no moonlight. I spotted something in the air moving very strangely. First I thought it was aircraft, you know, that MQ-9 that was supposed to cover us but didn't. But then more I looked at it, more I saw that it wasn't that. It was making abrupt movements that no aircraft would be able to make. I watched it for about 30 minutes. I didn't tell anybody, because what can we possibly do about it? So I just kept looking. The lights seemed to remain in generally same area, despite the abrupt movements. I almost wanted to stay up and see what they look like in daylight. Fuck. Thank God I didn't. I was relieved from my guard post at 0400, just to awaken about an hour and a half later, with a very strange sound. Sounded kind of like a jet flying over your head, but sound was very strange, was almost like screeching metal mixed with jet noises. As I got up I saw my squad waking up at the sky, talking to each other. Dude, do you see that? What the fuck is that thing? It looks like an upside down pyramid. When I looked up, no shit, it did look like an upside down flying pyramid. I never believed in aliens, so I tried to professionalize it to myself, thinking it was some super duper secret aircraft deployed by Uncle Sam to support us. Turns out it wasn't. Pyramids moved intelligently, like they were watching us. They were fast as fuck. No conventional aircraft would be able to match its speed or movements. 2 pyramids just kept circling around or blocking position. It's almost like they were playing with us or seeing what we're going to do. Unfortunately, United States Army is full of some gun motherfuckers. One of the gunners decided it was a good idea to get his 240 Bravo and engage flying pyramids with it, hoping to shoot one down. Stupid, you say? I'd say yes too. He picked up his 240 and let off a few rounds. He missed the pyramids, of course, but then both of them stopped. My heart dropped to the ground at that point. I knew he fucked up, but nothing I could do about it. One of the pyramids shot what looked like a laser at him, evaporating him completely, turning him into dust in a split second. We all froze in awe. If we just get attacked by aliens? He sure did. At that point our squad leader began to yell to put the weapons down and take off the helmets, hoping it would de-escalate our little interplanetary conflict. That didn't work. He suffered the same fate as our 240 gunner. At that point we'll just started the run. Only thing is, what the fuck are you going to run to, in the middle of white desert full of ISIS? Take my chances. Me and 3 more soldiers ran to the nearest wadi. We jumped into it, and waited about 20 minutes, hoping the flying pyramids will go away, but they didn't. They just kept floating around us. Quickly became hopeless. Can you do about it? We decided that if we show no hostility towards it, maybe it will just let us go. I volunteered to be a test rabbit for that. I got out of water. I slung my sniper rifle on my back and raised both of my hands up. I finally got to take a good look at the flying pyramids. They were solid black with no signs of being piloted by anybody. Well, if it's my time, then it is my time, I thought. I just kept on walking towards our old blocking position with my hands up. I was trying not to look at the pyramids anymore, however. I was expecting to get smoked at any second now, but as I kept walking nothing happened. I made it to our old blocking position just to find that there's nobody there. It was safe to assume that they all died. I turned around and I began walking back to Wadi where rest of us were. I kept walking and pyramids were following me, circle around, getting higher and getting It's like they were trying to get a good look at me. I hope they did. I went back to the wadi and told everyone that for everyone else died. There was no time to drop a tear for them, as we were about to join them, or at least we thought we were. We sat there through the entire night. Every single one of us was awake when we heard helicopters coming. Holy fuck, I thought, what if these things are still in the air? They're going to blow the helicopter right out of the sky. I looked up but I didn't see him anymore. I alerted everybody else, and orient towards the helicopter sound. We were waving our hands in the air trying to get pilot's attention, and we finally did. You landed his Black Hawk and we were able to run into it and get the fuck out of Dodge. When we got back we were all debriefed, until not to talk about this ever again. Whatever those things were, the government and the United States military did not want for anybody to know about it. It's almost like they knew what they were. And to this day I still believe that the whole thing was a setup. They were just trying to see what these aliens are going to do when facing people. We just happened to be a test subject. But that's not what we're being told. We were told that we might have experienced some kind of illusion, caused by a toxic gas that is in the air in that area, the desert. What a load of bullshit, I thought. Later I looked up what those things were. I think they were called Varmanas. There were some sightings of them in Afghanistan too, but not with such a tragic outcome. The disappearance of the soldiers was explained by a helicopter crash, which we all knew was a lie. I'm hoping that eventually the truth will come out. With all these congressional hearings about aliens, maybe one day our story will come out too. I am a helicopter mechanic stationed at Joint Base Lewis McChord. My story is not about action and encountering supernatural beings while shooting bad guys in the face if that's what you are here for. I was a single E4 specialist living in the barracks. I enjoyed my job working at Gray Army Airfield fixing Apache helicopters. I love those things, and I love working on them. My days were usually pretty busy. I'd wake up around 0545 to get ready for PT at 0630. After PT or physical training, I would head over to IDFAC to grab some food before heading over to the airfield. I had a beat-up Honda Civic 1993 that took me around base and Seattle on the weekends. I always loved Seattle, especially going there on the weekends. When you get there early enough in the morning you can stand on Capitol Hill watching mist rolling in. It's quite a sight. Most of the time my unit was in garrison. We would rarely go to the field, which was great. My friends from infantry brigades were pretty much never around, as they spent months at the time either in Yakima or in the training area of the back gate of JBLM. My barracks were located on the north side of the airfield, pretty close to 2nd Ranger Battalion barracks. Those guys were always gone, man. I always saw them training, day and night. One weekend my buddy and I decided to hang out in Seattle for a weekend. We reserved the hotel room and we were planning on clubbing for 2 nights, see if we can find ourselves some new girlfriends. We were in luck that weekend, at least we thought we were. The hotel we reserved was right in downtown Seattle. It better be for $350 a night. We both spent good part of our paycheck on it. Anyway, we did not have to drive anywhere because all of the coolest clubs were walking distance. We partied the entire first night, and we both were quickly running out of money as we were sparing no expense on alcohol. The second night both of us broke. E3s were down to about $15, with no new girlfriends in sight. As we ran out of money we decided to walk to the hotel room to end weekend. We planned on getting up, getting free hotel breakfast, and heading back to JBLM. The walk back to hotel was a bit long, and we had to pass an area full of homeless people. We were trying not to look at any of them as we're walking. Suddenly, some old lady decided to ask us for some money. Oh, let me tell you about my body, Josh. Let's just say when he got drunk he was a total dick, which contributed to us not hooking up with anybody that weekend. At this point of time Josh was intoxicated enough, and a strong Republican was coming out of him drunker he got. So he had no love for homeless people, to say the least. She asked him, "Son, could you spare some change please? I haven't had anything to eat in days." Lady did look like she could use some food. Her hair looked like it wasn't washed in decades. Her eyes were bloodshot. Her cloth looked like she was recently attacked by a bear. She also had a strong Eastern European accent. Josh looked at her in disgust. I could already tell the conversation isn't going to go down well. Josh looked at her and said, "Why would I give you my hard-earned money? So you can go buy some crack?" "I don't think so, bitch." I laughed inside because neither me nor him actually had any money left. If I had some spare change, I would have given it to her, but we were all wiped out. "Hey, Josh, chill, she is just some homeless crazy lady," I told him. I could see Lady's face change. It turned angry and ominous at the same time. "All of you young guys have no respect for elders anymore," she said in broken English. After that she started speaking some language I never heard before, but all I could hear was. I didn't think anything of it and Josh and I just kept walking. She suddenly stood up and said, "You will pay for this, and so will your children, and your grandchildren," and then she continued something in her language again. Josh started laughing, calling her crazy bitch as we were walking away. It was 3 a.m. by the time we got to the hotel room. We both were exhausted from all of the alcohol and club lights, so we just crashed in our beds. I had a super weird dream that night. In the dream I woke up and got up from the bed, and I decided to wake up Josh, but when I shook the figure under the blanket, the crazy homeless lady rolled on her back and began laughing so loud it made me pass out. I woke in cold sweat. I took a shower and went down to eat breakfast. Sun was already out. I grabbed my plate with eggs and sausage, and sat down. When I looked up, my heart dropped. I saw the same crazy homeless lady staring right at me with an ominous smile. She was sitting in the table and eating in the most disgusting manner, drooling over her food while smiling and staring right at me. I woke up again. "What the fuck?" I screamed out loud. That woke up Josh. He also looked like he hasn't slept in days. "Dude, did you also have some weird dream with that crazy lady?" "Fuck yeah, I did. What the fuck, man? I never had any dreams this vivid." "I don't, man, but I think we should go apologize to that lady from last night." Non-intoxicated version of Josh agreed with me. We quickly got up and checked out of the hotel and drove down to where we saw her last night. But she wasn't there. Josh and I found parking and we both walked over to where she was last night. There was a homeless guy sitting against the wall smoking a cigar. "Who are you looking for?" he asked. "There was a lady here last night. She was like Russian or something. Where does she stay?" "Oh, you are looking for Mila. She wasn't Russian, she was Romanian, and you are too late. She died last night." Both Josh and I froze in disbelief. "Yay, man, cops came and ambulance and shit. She ended up having a heart attack after someone was talking shit to her last night. You know how people are nowadays, man. Everybody just acts like we want to be homeless. None of us want to be here, man. It's just life happens, you know." The man kept rambling on about something we weren't listening to. We both felt guilty as hell for this, and feeling of dread and guilt made us both quiet the whole ride back to JBLM. When we got back in base on Sunday afternoon, Josh immediately grabbed the last beer out of the fridge and began talking. "Man, how in the fuck am I supposed to know that she was gonna die? You know, why do I feel bad? This shit ain't my fault. I didn't make her homeless." "You didn't have to be a dick either, dude." Josh looked at me with a bit of a rage, but he stopped himself from blowing, and stormed out of the room. He went down to a smoking area right outside of the barracks. I followed him shortly after to bum a smoke of someone. Josh was out loud talking about what happened to us on Saturday night with our company medic. They both started laughing really loud. I thought to myself, damn, he doesn't feel bad at all. It was getting dark and I wanted to rack out, because I had to wake up at 05:00 for a PT test. I didn't have any vivid dreams this time, but it was something else. I woke up paralyzed. I couldn't move at all. I used to have sleep awakenings before, but nothing like this. As I was laying there unable to move, with a corner of my eye, I spotted a dark figure standing to the right of me. I shared my room with some specialist that just got here from Germany. He was a flight medic and mostly worked night shift. So he wasn't there tonight. The figure I spotted didn't move, it was just standing there very still. After about 10 seconds of me noticing the dark figure, I heard growling outside of my door and sound of nails scratching the door. I was terrified and my heart was about to jump out of my chest. I remembered from the time I had sleep awakenings, what worked for me was to attempt to quickly jerk my head to the side. I did just that, but I still couldn't wake up. I kept doing it until I finally was able to wake up. When I woke up, I didn't want to go back to bed. I grabbed my last cigar and went downstairs. When I got down to the smoking area, I saw Josh sitting there as well. "What's up, dude?" he said with an exhausted look on his face. "Keep having nightmares, man," Josh replied. "Me too. I don't want to go back to sleep at all. Fuck that." He put away his cigar and looked at me. "I think I'll go watch a movie or something. Hopefully I won't see any more nightmares." This was super weird that both of us kept having nightmares at the same time. It was 0230, and I was getting more and more tired. I went back to sleep. A loud knock on the door woke me up. It was my squad leader, Sergeant Dawson. "Wake up, dickhead, you were late for the PT test," he yelled. I looked at the clock, it was 0630. Fuck, I thought, great, now I'm in trouble. Sergeant Dawson told me to come see Platoon Sergeant after PT is done. I went through my usual routine and went downstairs to where our platoon office. I saw Josh standing there. "Why are you here?" I replied. "I missed PT test, couldn't sleep for shit." Platoon Sergeant was not happy about both of us missing the PT test, and if we're late one more time he would recommend punishment under UCMJ, or also known as Uniformed Code of Military Justice. Josh and I crossed eyes as we were leaving the office. His eyes looked exhausted, like he hasn't slept in days. The following week, nothing weird happened to me, but I did notice that Josh was quickly deteriorating. He kept missing formations, and was not even taking showers or getting a haircut. About 2 weeks later I finally go to sit down with him at the VAC. He wasn't even eating, he was just staring at his plate, and anxiously looking around. "Dude, are you okay?" I asked him. "No, man," he replied. Tears started to roll down his eyes. "I see her, man. She is following me, man." He started whipping. "She is everywhere, in my room, at maintenance bay. She is there behind me in formation." He kept crying. Damn, I thought to myself, he is really fucked up. I decided to help him. "Bro, let's go to talk to Chaplain, maybe he can help." He wasn't even listening to me. He looked at me and then looked behind me, and he started crying even more. "She is right behind you, man," he said. I turned around and looked behind me. There was no one there, of course. "Dude, there is no one here," I told him. He started crying even harder. "It's all in your head, man. You need help." I got up, grabbed his wrist. "Let's go to Madigan, man. They will help you there. Madigan is a JBLM medical center." "Fuck no, man. They can't help me, man. They can't help me," he continued. At this point other soldiers started to notice Josh's state. Out of nowhere our chaplain's assistant came up to us and was asking if we need help. I told him that he needed to see someone. We both picked him up and walked him to my car. We took him straight to the chapel, where he was able to see our battalion chaplain. Josh walked out of his office not looking any better at all. Chaplain walked out with a worrisome face and told both of us that he will take him to mental health clinic right now. He put Josh in the car and drove away. I was worried about him, and also a bit worried for myself. What if it comes back? I decided that it might be a good idea to see someone other than army doctors. I googled psychics and found one in Tacoma. She charged me $200 to hear what I had to say. The lady was attentive and was carefully listening to everything I was saying. At the end she said, "Honey, your friend has a very strong curse on him. I don't know about you, but I would watch things around you and come back to me if things start to happen again. I took her advice, but I felt horrible about not being able to help Josh. He spent week at Madigan and was released. With few hours he disappeared. Company command wrote him off as AWOL, until his body was found hanging from the tree in a training area 4, right outside of East Gate of JBLM. I was later told by an MP I knew that it looked like he did it as soon as he was released from Madigan. Nothing happened to me since then, but if it does I can only hope I won't suffer the same fate as him. Jefferson Barracks. Jefferson Barracks was used for many years as a staging area, post and military hospital from the early days of the frontier until after World War II. The National Cemetery located here was established in 1863 and, like so many of the buildings on the post, has ghost stories of its own. Many of the tales at Jefferson Barracks revolve around the old buildings and former hospitals where so many men died after being wounded on the battlefields. In January 1922, President Warren G. Harding ordered a section of Jefferson Barracks to become the home of a veterans hospital, which opened in March 1923. The physicians here were given the task of caring for wounded and invalid soldiers, and the hospital began providing continuous treatment for veterans until the base closed down. During the years of its operation, the building became known for hosting a ghost. According to a story, there was once a private Halloween party that was held at the hospital. Security officers who worked the gate later commented to one of the party organizers about the excellent Civil War officer's uniform that one of the guests had worn to the party. The official was taken aback and replied that there had been no one wearing such a costume. The security officer was just as surprised because he distinctly remembered a man in a Civil War-era uniform who had entered the hospital grounds, presumably to attend the party that was going on. Another similar version of the story involves the same Halloween party at the hospital. The host of the party, who was one of the officials at the hospital, noticed a man in a Civil War officer's uniform sitting on a stone wall at the edge of the throng of guests. The host walked over to the man and asked him how he liked the party. The soldier whispered a hoarse reply like it good, he said. The host, apparently miffed at the guest's crude reply, turned around and started to walk away. However, he looked back over his shoulder a few moments later and saw that the man in the Civil War costume was gone. He later discovered that no one invited to the party, or in attendance that night, wore such a costume to the event. And the former hospital is far from the only site known for its ghosts. There have been stories told about the post for many decades. During the Civil War, and for years after, soldiers guarded the train depot and the railroad tracks located along the Mississippi River. They also guarded the headquarters building that was located on the bluff above the depot. One night during the Civil War, a sentry was walking his post near the building. As he rounded the corner, he reportedly observed a solitary figure walking up the grassy hill from the train yard. As the soldier stood watching, he realized that the man was not a person at all, but what was described as a blurry spook. Stories about the headquarters building continue to be told, and stories range from encounters with the ghost of the Civil War-era officer to strange sounds that cannot logically be explained. It is not uncommon for security officers to hear footsteps and rustling sounds in the building when no one is there. There is also a long-running legend about a ghost who haunts the post's old powder magazine as well. The massive limestone building was built in 1857 as a secure location to store rifles, cannons and gunpowder for the troops at the post. In 1871, the Federal Arsenal in St. Louis was closed and its contents were also moved to Jefferson Barracks. The powder magazine remained in constant use until the post closed in 1946. In more recent times, it has become a historical museum that is run by the St. Louis County Parks and Recreation Department. The story of the ghost here has its beginnings around the start of World War II. In the dark days at the start of the war, sentries were posted all around the fort to protect it from possible incursion. One of the most important guard positions was the powder magazine. Armed sentries were often seen patrolling around the building or walking across the top of the stone wall that surrounded the magazine. Several of the soldiers who stood guard here reported seeing a ghostly sentry who would occasionally appear and challenge the confused guard who was standing his post. The threatening spirit was said to have a bullet hole in his head, running red with blood, and was said to be so frightening that several guards allegedly threw down their guns and deserted their posts after encountering him. One story had it that a certain soldier was so frightened that he not only left his post one night, but that he also left the army. According to the story, the spectral sentry was a guard who had been killed years before when a raiding party attempted to steal munitions from the powder magazine. He was believed to have confronted his living counterparts because he thought they were trespassers. Even after all of these years, he was still on duty, even in death. Many of the former barracks buildings are said to be haunted as well, including Building 28. This building was constructed back in 1897 as a double barracks with a 3-story tower in the center. It had been designed to hold up to 4 companies of cavalry soldiers and their non-commissioned officers. Today it is the home of the 218th Engineer Squadron. Throughout the 1970s, men working inside of the building reported hearing ghostly footsteps pacing the corridors of the building. One night, a man was working on some training records for an upcoming inspection when he heard someone walking around on the 2nd floor above his office. He didn't think that anyone else was in the building, but as it simply sounded like another soldier working upstairs, he never bothered to check on it. Later though, more footsteps joined the first set and the noise became very distracting as he tried to finish his reports. Finally, he tossed aside his papers and went upstairs, but when he got to the area where he believed the sounds had been coming from, he found nobody there. He looked around for a few moments and then decided to write the whole thing off to his imagination. However, as soon as he got back downstairs to his desk, the footsteps started again. This time, he decided to just wrap up his reports and call it a night. One evening in the fall of 1980, Chief Master Sergeant Eugene Anaker and several other Air National Guard NCOs were working late in the building. When they decided to leave for the night, the group turned out the lights, locked the doors and then walked out into the parking lot in front of the building, where they stood talking for a few minutes. As they started to leave, Anaker happened to look up and noticed that one of the lights on the 3rd floor of the building had been accidentally left on. He dispatched the lowest ranking of the small group to go back into the building and turn it off. The young NCO unlocked the main doors, climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor and turned the light off. A few moments later, he reappeared downstairs and he locked the door behind him as he left the building again. As the young man walked toward him, Chief Anaker looked up and noticed that the same light was on once again, even though they had just seen the other soldier turn it off. Thinking that the wiring in the old building was going bad, he sent the same NCO back into the building again to turn it off. When the NCO returned to the parking lot once more, Anaker was stunned to see that the same 3rd floor light was once again shining. Again, he sent the same NCO back inside to turn the light off once more. This time when he came out though, none of them looked to see if the light had turned itself back on. This time, they simply got into their cars and went home. I am an F-18 pilot stationed at Naval Air Station Lemoore. I am part of the FA-41, or also known as Black Aces. It's a kick-ass squadron with a lot of history tearing shit up across the whole globe. I was deployed multiple times with carrier strike groups to Middle East. Most of the time I was just flying in support of ground operations, simply dropping some serious ordnance on some insurgents in the cave or something. Occasionally I would fly DCA or defensive counter-air missions at Strait of Hormuz. Usual fun stuff that pilots get to do. I was deploying a lot, and never really got to fly a whole lot of training missions. In 2019, my wingman and I were training off the coast of San Diego with Marine F-18 squadron called Red Devils. We did that quite a bit. We loved training with Marines practicing defensive counter-air as Marines were practicing their air interdiction and dogfighting. They were some good pilots. We refueled at an aircraft carrier docked in San Diego and we took off for our flight. I checked in with air controllers with our mission number so we could begin our training coordinating with the carrier radar team E-2 Hawkeye that flew behind us, giving us a radar feed for area ahead. I was no Top Gun, but at this point of my career I was a pretty experienced pilot, We were about to run through our defensive drill when I had a call from a radar team informing me and the Marines that there were some strange objects about 50 nautical miles away from us. My weapons officer also mentioned it to me, but I brushed it off as a glitch. We were training in the warning area, so there shouldn't have been a lot of air traffic in this area. But then Red Devils got on the exercise channel and confirmed that their onboard radars are getting weird hits about 50 nautical miles away southwest of where we were. The exercise control officer ended the training. Marines started flying back to Marine Corps Air Station Miramar because they didn't have Super Hornets and their fuel yanks were much smaller than ours. We stuck around waiting for further instructions from the carrier. I told my weapons officer, I hope Air National Guard is on top of it today because I sure as shot don't feel like flying over there. Well, let's just say Air Defense Sector Operations Center told the carrier that by the time the F-16s fly out of March Air Reserve Base it will be at least an hour and they might as well send the F-18s. So we were now tasked with a real-world intercept. We were told to land in the carrier and arm before heading back out. We were armed with AIM-120M ROM. This missile is used exclusively for air-to-air battle. This area was known for aerial phenomena, like WAPs and other stuff, like weird streaks in the air. Commander Fravor ended up chasing one tic-tac out back in 2004, so we were all fairly familiar with the WAP activity in the area. Despite the curiosity, I didn't want to accept this change of mission, but the wing commander directly reached out and told us to get over there and check it out. Well, what the hell are you going to do? We took off from the carrier and began to get hits on our radar, but they were very intermittent, like our radar was glitching. The carrier radar operators kept walking us onto the target as it was moving. Eventually we hit what was called a merged plot, meaning now the carrier only sees one radar signature, and he can't distinguish between the US and the target. That usually means we should be able to get a solid radar hit on our aircraft radar. But still nothing. The radar hits kept going in and out. Me and my Weezo started to look for an object visually, but still couldn't see anything. After 10 minutes of circling around the area, we had a visual on it. It looked like a super smooth tic-tac. It was just hanging there, not moving. It was sitting at about 15,000 feet, so we had to climb a little to get to it. As soon as we're within a mile of it, object abruptly moved. It was so fast that we were all shocked by its aerodynamic performance. Holy shit, dude, this thing is fucking fast, my Weezo said. As object moved, it changed shape. It was now a donut-looking object spinning around an invisible axis. We circled around again to get to its new position, which was even higher than previous. When we're close, object jumped again. It was like it was playing with us. All of a sudden I heard a call on our air control net. An unknown voice was talking. Elvis, which was my call sign. I need you to get a lock on that thing. What the fuck, I thought, and who are you? Who is talking? Identify yourself, I said. Unknown voice said. It's classified. In the situation like that, a normal procedure is to ask for initials of a person authorizing the attack. Give me your initials then, whoever you are. FMB, voice on the other end said. I told my Weezo to get ready. He told me we need to get some distance between us and the object so he can weaponeer the shot. Object was not moving. It was still and was changing its shape to a saucer-like this time. We swung around the F-18. I turned off afterburner, trying to stabilize the aircraft, making it easier for Weezo to engage. We were about 1,600 yards from the thing. Our radar started acting out again. It was obvious that whatever that thing was, it was jamming it. That is technically a hostile act. I briefly lost visual, so my Weezo had to slew a targeting pod on it again. He did, and was able to lock in. As soon as I locked, I let off a shot and then another. My wingman shot 2 more MROMs at it. We were trying to watch an effect on our targeting pod using FLIR. 2 missiles exploded before even reaching the target, but other too hot. The thing did not explode though, but it did lose whatever propulsion system it had, because it began to fall. No signs of debris coming of it. It was still completely intact. We called the weapons away to the carrier and reported that aircraft was shot down. We heard "good job. Go ahead" and RTB on the other end. We landed on the carrier. As soon as we got out the F-18, we were escorted down to SIF, or a top-secret facility, that housed all of the super-duper secret information usually used by intel folks. We were told that the craft was experimental and thanked us for participating in its testing. That was extremely difficult to believe, because the picture of how it moved got imprinted in my mind. There is no fucking way we made it. In a state of shock, me and my weasel walked out of the SIF. But if we were told that, then it is probably true, we both thought. I returned home that day and collapsed from exhaustion. I went well over my flight hours for this week, and I couldn't help passing out for about 12 hours. I woke up to some serious headache, accompanied by ringing in my ears. I never had that before, even when I flew missions overseas, for a lot longer than that. The headache would not go away. I went to emergency room, and I was told that I was just exhausted, and there is nothing to worry about. The headache persisted, and was just getting worse and worse. I ended up being hospitalized. The CAT scan came back with some anomaly in brain activity, like the chemical reactions were changing in my brain. I began to see things. It was terrifying. I would see people walk and disappear into thin air. I was walking into a diner I go to all the time in Fresno, just to find that it has completely changed inside, but it would look normal when I would walk out. I was calling friends that said they never knew who I was, and to stop calling them. It was like I kept walking in and out of different dimensions. Finally, the headache has gone away and all of the visions had stopped. But I am convinced that this was not a man-made aircraft that we had shot down off the coast of California. A Special Forces soldier with 5th Special Forces Group out of Fort Campbell, Kentucky. I'm not going to mention my battalion or an ODA, Operational Detachment Alpha. For those of you who don't know, it's a group of 12 soldiers who supposed to insert themselves into a hostile country and begin propping up resistance forces against whoever we are supposed to be fighting with. I just arrived to my ODA right before deployment to Afghanistan. My company was supposed to cover a remote area of Kunar Province. Kunar Province is a very mountainous province covered by forests. It is very high above sea level, causing many people not used to it pass out that are not used to this altitude. In 2015, I went on my first 6-month tour to Kunar Province. The deployment to Kunar Province was not supposed to be an easy one. Most of the guys who's been to Kunar Province always talked about how difficult it was to operate in those mountains. At the beginning of our deployment, we were in Bagram Air Base. For about 2 weeks we did a whole lot of nothing, except working out, receiving some briefings and classes, and going to the range to maintain our marksmanship skills. After 2 weeks we were finally able to go to Kunar for the first time. We were linking up with Afghan Commando Unit. It was best trained and equipped Afghan unit. We were replacing another ODA station at Afghan Commando Base. We didn't get to talk to them too much as they left almost immediately as we arrived. We were going out on missions with Afghan commandos for about first 3 months. Most of it was night raids, reconnaissance, and intelligence gathering. Nothing out of ordinary has happened. Couple of firefights, couple of eyed strikes, but that's all the stuff we were used to. About halfway into our deployment, the task force ordered us to clear a very remote village in Kunar Province. According to our J2 coalition, or Afghan forces had never been there. I will not disclose name of this village, but it was right on the border with Pakistan. We began planning the mission. We identified all of the requirements requested, needed air support and airlift. We then were briefing our Afghan counterparts. We were going to take a platoon of Afghan commando with us if shit hits the fan. There's only 12 of us in an ODA, and having a platoon of highly trained Afghan commandos with us, it's always a great bonus. When we were briefing our Afghan counterparts on the upcoming mission, a few soldiers from commando platoon began to make faces, like we didn't know what the hell we were doing for where we were going. I asked the commando, "Put you later, why are they nodding in such a negative way?" The platoon leader in broken English explained to me that both of those soldiers are from Kunar Province, and there's some legend attached to the area where we were going. Something has to do with jinns and evil spirits. What a fucking waste of time, I thought. Spirits, jinns. We got our gear on and moved to the airfield, where Afghan counterparts arrived shortly after. We were waiting for two Chinook CH-47 helicopters to pick us up. Chinooks had flew in, landed on the airfield. We quickly made our way into inside the Chinook, and our team captain ensured that Afghans were accounted for and good to go. We took off that in the middle of the night with an intent to hit the objective early in the morning. That's not how we usually operated, but due to altitude and distance from the nearest airfield to the objective, we could only use MQ-9s for air support. AC-130s would not do well in this environment. After about an hour and a half of a flight, Chinooks landed on the side of a mountain. They were still hovering as the pilots dropped the ramp to let us dismount. We successfully egressed both aircrafts and begun pulling security. My watch showed at 4:00. We had about an hour and a half before the sunrise. That's the time we would use to set ourselves up for a successful mission. We kept slowly moving through the night and were reached outskirt of this village at about 5:25. Sun begun to rise. We decided to split our OTA into 4 elements. 2 of the elements with occupy and S and O positions, also known as surveillance and observation position. Our second element with occupy a support by fire position with Afghan weapons squad. And other 2 elements would accompany Afghan commandos as they were entering the village. Our combat controller was at the S and O position with me. We were close enough to see for Afghan squads along with our guys answering the village. We were able to maintain pretty good radio comms, and everything was going well. Team captain went with an assault element. He was very active on the radio, updating everybody else on how things are going. Village was not a very big settlement, maybe 20 to 25 huts, with a little bazaar, but as we were watching, we did not see a single civilian or a hostile in that area. Village was quickly cleared, and team captain ordered our OTA to consolidate in one of the houses. We quickly made our way down and set up the security around an old compound. If you've been to Afghanistan, you would know what I'm talking about. As we were occupying a compound, a really thick mist begun rolling on us. We were utterly confused by that, as day was very sunny with clear skies. As mist rolled and things became dark and hard to see, visibility dropped to maybe 10 to 15 meters. Our CCT was trying to get a hold SWO to see what's going on and what weather forecast are they going to fuck up this time. But he couldn't get a hold of them. All of the comps seemed to be down. Our emergency cell phones didn't have a signal. Our PRC-117 Fox was unable to acquire satellite. Our Iridium phones wouldn't work. I've been to many missions in a very remote areas, but never had something like that happen to me. It was very bizarre. Our Afghan counterparts begun freaking out. Some of them started crying, and some of them were visibly irritated, to say scared. This is the first time when I saw Afghan commandos completely drop security posture and abandon their posts. This was very out of character for them. But this was something real. One of the Afghan soldiers kept saying spirits and Pashto. Something about us disturbing them. Our team captain wanted to hear none of that. He kept telling us to try to get a hold of the JOC Joint Operations Center for those of you not in the military. Our team captain wanted to report that objective was cleared, and person we were looking for, codename Jackhammer, was not in the village, and the village was completely empty. We tried our comms for about 6 hours, before our team captain decided to grab a sat phone and couple of Afghan commandos along with team chief, and try to make it up on top of the mountain where he thought he was going to get some service. As we sat there and time was passing by, we noticed that sun was not going down. Even the color of the sun was a little bit different. It was almost like it was red. Mist also didn't go anywhere, and the whole thing was extremely creepy. Although we couldn't get a hold of the JOC, we could still talk to each other. Our team sergeant was constantly checking in with the team captain as they were making their way up the mountain. All of a sudden we heard gunshots and screaming. Oh shit, we thought Taliban had finally showed up. 4 Green Berets and squad of Afghan commandos rushed to the area where they heard the gunfire coming from. Myself included, we made our way to where we thought we heard the gunfire to discover our team captain just standing there surrounded by 3 bodies. What the fuck, we thought. What happened, I asked him. He didn't respond and he had a very evil grin on his face. He was smiling while looking at me like when the dude get possessed by demon in the movies. This was the kind of smile I was seeing on his face. I told him, "Hey sir, I would put your weapon down and step away from it." He didn't even react. He started to raise his weapon, as I started screaming at him to put it down. He was still not listening. I had my M4 pointing it at him, and I squeezed the trigger, but I didn't shoot at him, I shot at his feet. He just stopped and looked down at where bullet landed. He didn't even flinch. He begun to talk, but it was not English. He wasn't even pushed to. It was something else I never heard before, some dead language or something. How in the fuck would he know something like that? The guy is an idiot. I talked to myself. Afghan commandos dropped their weapons and ran when he started talking whatever language he was talking. Team Sergeant was trying to talk to the captain to calm him down and make him put down the weapon. Captain was just staring at him. In a split second, Captain raised his pistol and shot Team Sergeant in the face several times, dropped dead. Remain and Green Berets fired at the captain. He collapsed as he was dying. They called me. He said, "You need to get out of here." And then he let go of his last breath. We were all in shock. 3 of our cameras just perished in a split second. The most senior person was Sergeant First Class Johnson. He gathered us in the compound after we picked up bodies of commandos and our guys. Right before he was going to brief us on what he wants to do, Afghan command up with you later walked in. There was worry on his face, if not terror. He spoke a pretty good English, and he begun talking to us. He said, we need to get out of here, but it's not that easy. You can't just walk out from this village." We asked him, "What do you mean? Why can't we just walk to the first Afghan border guard outpost we see?" The platoon leader told us that he didn't know how to explain it, but if we want to try and walk away, we are more welcome to do so. But whatever happened to our team captain might end up happening to us as well. Sergeant First Class Johnson to grab 2 more Green Berets with them and decided to make his way out. He said that once he gets to the high ground and he can get a hold of the jock, he'll pull everybody else up so we can get out of here. He began walking. The sun was still the red and creepy, the mist was still there, and it seemed to be getting even thicker. We heard more gunshots. Oh fuck, we thought, it's happening again. We ran to the location of gunshots with our weapons up, already know what to expect. Sure, Johnson was standing there surrounded by 2 bodies of the Green Berets that he took with them. He had the same grin on his face as a captain did before he died. My body staff Sergeant Rivera did not wait or try to talk to him, he simply shot him right in the head. Sergeant First Class Johnson collapsed. There was only 6 of us left now plus the Afghans. I decided to talk to 2 soldiers that said they were from Kunar province, and were somewhat familiar with this place. As I approached them, I noticed how calm they were compared to everybody else. I asked her interpreter Abdul to translate. I asked him if they have experienced anything like this before. One of them said yes. I then asked them how did they get out of there. Looked me in the eyes and said, "Inshallah." Abdul translated it as something like, "This is the place where God tests man. If they have a good heart and soul, God willing, they will make it out. And if not, they will not, and they will die here, and their soul will forever be trapped in this village." What the fuck, I thought? We were all pretty tired and wanted to take a nap. While 3 of us sleep, 3 of us guard the compound. I took my nap. I had an absolutely horrible nightmare. I don't even remember what it was about, but all I remember is that I did not want to go back to sleep. When we woke up in the morning or whatever it was, we noticed that mist was gone, and sun became normal Gila orange a color. Our CCT was finally able to get a hold of the jock and requested immediate extraction. Multiple helicopters flew in to pick us up, including those that perish. As we were flying out, I was looking at the village, and thinking how souls of all those that died here will never leave this village, and how horrifying it was. I felt blessed that I made it out. Special Operations Task Force wrote this off as an engagement with Taliban, and those who died by enemy fire. They simply brushed the whole thing under the rug. I will never forget this, and to this day I have nightmares about that village, where I see Team Captain grinning at me. I am a Marine Corps MARSOC operator. I was stationed in Camp Lejeune for most of my career. I started off as a regular infantryman 0311. I got quickly bored of mowing grass, cleaning weapons, and standing in formations for hours waiting for commander to spill some bullshit safety briefing. I decided that I wanted to do little more with my Marine Corps career, and I went up MARSOC selection and eventually I became a Marine Raider. For those of you having no clue what I am talking about, MARSOC stands for Marine Special Operations Command. Just like Army has Green Berets, Marine Corps has us. Most of our missions were always oriented towards Middle East, Afghanistan in particular. I hardly spent any combat time anywhere else. Most of the time we are training other special operators from other countries. But occasionally we do our own training. Things like clearing ships from bad guys, or conducting reconnaissance on some sensitive objective. We do a lot. But what I am about to tell you is nothing like what I have ever experienced in my whole life, never mind the career. It all started with a simple training mission in the Caribbean. We were supposed to train with one of the Navy SEAL teams. We were going to practice raiding ships, obviously based on training location. You can imagine, this was something counter-narcotics related. We started our training journey in Honduras, working with local special operations unit, teaching them marksmanship, and some tactical stuff. We then got on a Sea Stallion helicopter and flew over to our next mission, which was to train with Navy SEALs. We were all pumped up about an opportunity to train with them. However, when we landed on our ship, we were told that SEAL platoon we were supposed to train with is not going to make it due to some real-life mission in Iraq. We ended up stuck on a ship with not a whole lot to do except turning paper targets into Swiss cheese. We were supposed to be there for a week. Because our ride was not scheduled for another week, we couldn't leave. We were bored out of our minds. Only thing we could is work out, which quickly gets old. Our last night there, we were woken up by a duty officer on the ship. We were told to grab pure shit and get in the briefing room. This was like 3 o'clock in the morning, so we thought that SEALs finally arrived. But that's not what it was. Our platoon commander started telling us that we have a real mission. There is apparently a radar hit on the ship that does not want to respond. So there is suspicion it could be trafficking ship. We were able to see a drone feed of this vessel. It was fairly large vessel, and it looked completely abandoned. There was no lights, no people walking around on the deck. It was just floating in the open ocean. Navy intel dudes thought that there are people on the ship. They are just hiding because they notices the Navy reconnaissance drone above them. It still doesn't explain why power was off, but whatever, they supposed to know what they are doing, right? We began analyzing where we could fast rope into to get more optimal position to begin clearing this thing. There was only 35 of us, so it would take a good amount of time before we finished clearing it. It took us about 6 hours to come up with a plan of how we are going to do it. We began getting our gear ready to go. We decided to hit it during daytime, since there was no visible presence of the crew or any kind of counter-air threat. Our platoon command decided that it is unnecessary to fast rope into it. We could just walk out of the ramp of CH-53 as it could easily land on vessel. Sounded like a good idea. We were all pretty certain that ship is full of drugs, and it was probably abandoned when traffickers noticed US Navy nearby. We began our flight towards the target ship. Platoon commander wanted to do a flyover the ship before land the aircraft on it. We flew 2 circles around the vessel, and did not see any activity on a deck. The sight of a ship was a bit eerie. You could see rust damage and, from what it looked like, fire damage all over. It was not in a good shape, or fit to be used for any kind of maritime purpose. After seeing absolutely no activity on the ship, our platoon commander looked a bit relieved, because he assumed that this will be an easy-peasy operation. He can put this on his evaluation report, and brag about it for rest of his Marine Corps career. Platoon commander gave order to pilot to go ahead and land on the deck of the vessel. It looked pretty empty and free of debris there, so it looked like a good place to land. Pilot slowly descended the Stallion down to the deck. He told our platoon commander that he felt uncomfortable setting his wheels on it, but he will have her about a foot away from the deck in order for us to egress. He began hovering the helicopter over the deck, and our platoon quickly poured out on the deck. Although there was no visible activity, everybody was still at the high state of readiness, everybody had their weapons up. After clearing an immediate area around us, we continued to clear the deck, moving towards control room. I started to notice that this ship wasn't used in decades, everything was covered with rust from the salt in the air, and it looked like the ship had a fire, but that fire probably happened 50 years ago, if not more. We kept moving through the ship, clearing every space inside. After about 3 hours, we began to relax as we realized there was nobody there. Platoon commander tried radio and back and checked Tactical Operations Center, but he couldn't get a hold of them. We were also too far away for a visual signals. We were essentially on our own. Our inability to contact our Tactical Operations Center did not throw any immediate red flags. That happened before. The platoon commander told us that he's going up on top of the ship to try to get better line of sight so he can report back. We decided to congregate on a deck after ship was called clear by our Fortune commander, as we were waiting for either Coast Guard or Navy intel folks to show up and investigate it. After about an hour of trying to get a hold of the fleet, we all begun to worry. Something just doesn't feel right about this whole thing, I thought. We spent another 2 hours battling with our comms, trying to get our PRC 150 to talk, but with no luck. Sun started to go down. Luckily we brought our night vision goggles with us. Platoon commander ordered us to mount them, in case of any threat that could pop up at any moment. At this point, we were all lost in the sauce. We were all under assumption that there would be a helicopter coming towards us. Since we lost our comms, that was a standard procedure during operations like this. But no one came. The eerie sight of blacked out ship at night did not make any of us feel any more comfortable. Platoon commander ordered us to set up perimeter security and maintain it until he gets positive comms with the fleet. We sat there for a good 30 minutes, and out of nowhere, all of the lights on the ship turned on, blinding the crap out of everybody who was wearing night vision goggles. You could hear people cussing and screaming. What the fuck? We were all in shock, even our platoon leader froze for a good minute. We began looking around, but still didn't see anybody. Platoon commander did a net call, warning everybody to keep an eye out for any kind of threat. But we all knew this was something else. There was no threat here, just some weird shit that we've never seen before. Platoon leader quickly ordered a 4-man team to go inside and clear out control room and see what is going on there. I volunteered to go with them, just because I didn't want to sit in one place in case there was really a threat. Quickly entered upstairs, find a whole lot of nothing. Put appearance of the ship's interior has completely changed. It was no longer an abandoned, raggedy, rusted out looking piece of crap. Everything was more or less clean and ready to be used. All of the radars and radio equipment was turned on to our amazement. One of the gunnery sergeants killed out. What the fuck is going on here? It was not like this before. How in the fuck is this possible? We're all a state of confusion. Then we started to hear radio traffic, but it was not any language that we could recognize, and most of us have some familiarity with other languages through our training. But this was not any language for heard of before. It sounded ancient, something you would hear in an alien movies. Gunnery Sergeant Janice smashed one of the radios with his buttstock. Although it was completely unnecessary, we all agreed with him doing that, because it was fucking weird. Everything here was fucking weird. Our platoon commander went up to the deck and informed everyone that he cannot get any positive comms with anybody. At this point we had no food or warm cloth, but the heater inside the control room seemed to be working just fine. Gunny Janice told us that we will have to hunker down here until we get rescued by Navy. God knows how long that is going to be. But nevertheless, we decided that there is not much we can do about it, and despite all of the weirdness we will have to spend longer than we thought on this godforsaken ship. As we sat around the control room, Gunny walks in and tells us that there are some crew rooms that were fully furnished and might be a good place to rack out. I went down with few of my squad mates to take a nap. So we did. The room was fully furnished, it even had linen. As I said, none of this was here when we were clearing the ship 12 hours earlier. I went to sleep on the couch. It didn't take long for me to fall asleep. I was having a weird nightmare, and eventually I woke. It felt like I didn't sleep. As I woke up, I heard a loud scream coming from down the hallway. I grabbed my rifle and ran towards it. I kept running, but the scream was just getting further and further away. Eventually, I ran into a locked door. I yelled out, "What the fuck? This door was not here before." I literally went down this hallway when we were coming down here from control room. Then it struck me that my squad mate was not there either. I ran back into the room just to find an empty bed where he was laying. Strangely, there was not even a sign of him being there, like an imprint on the bed sheets. There was nothing, like he was never even here. I grabbed my helmet and ran up to the deck. Again, no one was there. I ran outside screaming and yelling, but no one was there either. The whole ship appeared to be empty. A cold sensation went down my entire body when I realized I was here alone, not to mention of thoughts about teammates. Did they get evacuated but forgot about me? Well, that's a very unlikely scenario. Platoon commander was an accountability Nazi, and he would have never left the ship without complete headcount. I didn't know what to think. I went up to comms room and tried to see if I can make distress call, but nobody ever responded. All I've heard was a static on the other end. That's if there was another end. I also noticed a heavy fog that covered the entire ship. It was not unheard of, but the sight of fog was kind of a rarity around these parts. I started to get desperate. I wandered around a ship not knowing what to do next. I went up to the control room and sat on the chair. A sense of hopelessness and uncertainty began to settle in. I kicked my feet up on desk and began to drift away, when I heard, "Are you troubled, sir?" I've here behind me, as I fell down on the floor from being startled. I looked and there was a man in his 40s standing there looking at me. I yelled, "Get the fuck back." I raised my rifle and pointed at him. The guy's face expression did not even change a bit. He was just staring at me with cold, emotionless eyes. He said, "Sir, there is no need for this. I'm not here to hurt you," he said with a movie-like British accent. I asked him, "Who the fuck are you?" "My name is George, and I work on this ship." My heart nearly dropped to the ground. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. We searched and cleared entire shop, and there is no fucking way this dude would slip through. "What do you mean you work on this ship? This whole ship is fucked." "Well, she has seen better days, but I wouldn't discard her just yet. There is a lot of history inside her." "Okay, where are my teammates?" "Your teammates? Only one I have seen is you. I would have noticed bunch of blokes like you if there was more, but there is no one else here." "Who else is on this ship?" "Just me, and Will. You, I suppose you are American?" "Yes, I am." "And you are an army or something, judging by your outfit." "I am a Marine. Enough with questions. How do I get out here?" He looked at me confused. "I'm not entirely sure. What are you asking me?" "You are on the ship the middle of Atlantic Ocean. I don't think you can, unless someone comes to get you." I kept my face straight, but I was fucking terrified on the inside. "Okay, then what are you doing here?" "Like I said, sir, I take care of the ship." "So you were just floating in the gigantic ship by yourself? What kind of bullshit is that?" "Well, you see, some ships are special. This one was built by an unknown entity. Yes, you see, there is no records of this ship ever being built by anybody. Once I was serving in the Royal Navy and we had intercepted this beauty off the coast of Bermudas, and much to our surprise, we weren't able to leave. And then one day I woke up, And my teammates were gone, and I just stayed here to take care of her. After all, she took care of me, you cow. What do you mean, she took care of you? Sir, you will soon see for yourself what I mean by that. Like I said, this ship is very special. He turned his back towards me and began alking away, whistling and singing some old song. Hey, wait up, man. Shit said your teammates were gone? When was that? Oh, that was years ago. I joined the Royal Navy back in 1939, so you can imagine how long I was here for. My world just turned upside down. 1939, so the dude is like 100 years old then, I thought to myself. And what the fuck was he saying about ship taking care of him? All of it sounded surreal. I did not know what to make put of this whole thing. I'm talking to 100-year-old dude in the abandoned ship on the middle of the ocean. I kept thinking this was either a dream or some kind of psychosis. The man that called himself George turned around as he was walking away and said, "Would you like to join me for dinner?" I didn't say yes or no, I just followed him, as he was rumbling about the history of this ship and how it talks to him. We went to a dining room where there were tables already prepared. There were 2 bowls of soup and 2 glasses of water sitting on it. And how in the fuck did he know that he will need 2 meals? I sat on the table and carefully grabbed a spoon. George sat in his chair as well, and began talking. I knew there was going to be somebody else here one day. "Excuse me, but we have been talking for some time now and I still do not know your name," he asked. "It's Eric," I responded. "That's quite a nice name. My son's name is Eric." George's eyes began to tear. I haven't seen him in so long, quite frankly I don't even remember his face. This ship has taken all of these memories from me. I started to feel bad for him, but I still didn't trust a guy. "What can you tell me about this ship?" "Oh, she is a thing of beauty. She always took care of me while I was here, so as long as I take care of her," he responded. "What do you mean by take care of her?" "Well, you see, sometimes she needs to feed." "What do you mean, but feed on what?" His face changed as he started to get worried, like he was scared to say the truth. He looked up and looked at the ceiling. "I'd rather not say, some things better left alone." George picked up a napkin and wrote something on it. He then slid it to me. He wrote souls on the napkin. "Fuck, the ship eats souls. Is that what happened to my whole platoon?" "Walls have ears, you see," George said, smiling, "but eyesight is a problem," he continued. I grabbed my pen and wrote, "How do we get out of here?" George looked at it and smiled. "You see, she can't be hungry for too long as she starts to deteriorate, and I have to steer the ship towards where the food is, if you catch my drift." Shit, that makes sense. That's why the ship was so fucking trashed when we landed on it. And now it looks brand new. I thought to myself, how can I possibly escape this place? And only thing I could come up with without saying it out loud is sinking this motherfucker. I mean, it's still a ship after all. I thanked George and went on my way to see how I can sink it. I saw that there were rescue boats on the deck, which is how I can escape. But how to get this thing to sink? I went on top of the deck and looked to see if there was anywhere I can ram into, but there was nothing. Then it hit me. I have a bit of C4 in my assault pack. There was only about a pound of C4 along with some detonation cords and a blasting cap. It was enough to place it below waterline and make this thing go down. I went to the room where I slept and grabbed my stuff. I pulled everything out. "I would encourage you not to that, sir." George was standing right behind me. "Well, that's too bad because I am going home. If you are going to do what you are about to do, just remember that she can't die, because she is not a ship, she predates all of us." I looked at him and said, "I don't give shit, this fucking thing is going down." The speaker system all of a sudden went off with a loud scream-like noise that nearly left deaf. I fell down and reached for my helmet that had noise cancellation headphones. I put my helmet. Headphones were able to cancel some of the noise. George was looking at me with no change of his face expression, like noise did not affect him. I quickly ran down trying to get somewhere below waterline. I got down to mechanical room, and found a spot that will make this whole thing sink. I have been through some Navy SEAL demolition training, and that came handy. I taped block of C4 to wall, as I did that the door behind me slammed shut. Fuck, this thing is not going down easily. I tried opening the door but couldn't. I already initiated the time fuse, for 3 minutes. The realization that I am fucked came when I looked at the fuse almost burned down. I was preparing to see the Creator. My whole life flashed in front of my eyes. Suddenly, door opened. It was George standing there. "I thought you may be in need of assistance, sir," he said. Adrenaline rushed off my body. I yelled, "Run." We both started running up the stairs when we heard C4 go off. It shook the ship and caused a fireball-like explosion in a mechanical room. Ship began to make a strange noise that I never heard before anywhere else. It was a metal scratching sound, but it was like it was trying to talk to me. I could tell that the ship was started to take in water, as its top began to slowly rise up above the water. "Come on, George," I yelled. George and I cut the rope on the rescue boat and we both jumped on it. I started paddling away from the ship. George was looking like he was mesmerized as he saw his ship going down. We paddled away enough to see the ship get on its side and disappear under the water. George looked at me and calmly said, "Thank you." As he said it, he began to dissipate into thin air. It only took a second and he was gone. I am free now, just like that he was gone. I was shocked by what was happening. I blacked out. When I woke up, sun was beating down on my face. While I was dreaming, I was seeing George and he was telling me that I had a beacon on me that helped me get rescued. I must have forgotten that part. I actually did have it on my helmet. I looked at it and turned it on. I was floating in the open sea for probably another day or two. I could not remember, because I didn't get any water and I thought I was going to die. And then I heard a helicopter. It was Coast Guard. At this point I did not have an energy to even stand up. The rescue diver came down and grabbed me and pulled me up to a helicopter. I woke up on the same Navy ship that my team departed. I had some guy standing over me. He said he was glad that I am awake, and that he was an NCIS investigator. He questioned me about what happened. Of course I lied. Who the fuck would believe me? Turns out my platoon went completely missing. I just made up some story about ship exploding and sinking, and that's all I could recall. He left me alone. I returned to my base in Camp Lejeune, where I was questioned even more. There was whole investigation, and I had to give about 50 interviews to various agencies. But I kept to my story. Finally things came down and I was able to return to duty. Quite frankly, I did not want to be in Marine Corps anymore. I started looking up maritime history around that area, and turns out there was a British Navy had a similar incident around Bermudas. 35 sailors went missing, and never found while checking out a strange ship. When I looked at the picture of a missing crew, I saw George's face stare right at me. I recognized his face right away. That's how I knew I wasn't crazy. And I hope whatever happened to me will never happen to anybody again. About 6 months later, when I was already out of the Marine Corps, I watched some news piece about how there is a missing crew of a civilian research ship that was checking out an abandoned ship that later disappeared from the radar. And I remember what George said. It predates all of us. Maybe this ship is just manifestation of evil that takes form of a ship that roams Atlantic Ocean collecting innocent souls.